Hello, everyone. I'm Rajendra Roy, the Chief Curator of Film at the Museum of Modern Art and a member of the 50th Annual New Directors, New Films Selection Committee. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A for Luzzu. I want to thank our sponsors, Film at Lincoln Center's New Wave membership program, and here at MoMA, Chanel, and our annual film fund. Alex Camilleri, congratulations. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A, and congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Film at Lincoln Center, the MoMA, and your whole team. It's an incredible honor to be a part of this festival and also to show the film in a theater for the first time.
Yeah, we're really pleased that in-person experience is starting to creep back into our life here in New York. So wish that so many of your colleagues from around the world who are part of the festival could also experience that, but it is a small bit of joy to kind of step back into that. But we're also thrilled with everyone who was able to watch it online. This is a film of firsts in many directions for you, obviously, as a feature film director, but also the first Maltese film at Sundance and at a major film festival, I believe. And maybe you could speak a little bit to the significance of that, but it's not really your first time being in the spotlight because you have worked as an editor on many incredibly successful films that have gone to major festivals. And one of the key figures in that was Ramin Bahrani. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the experience of putting this film out now and what it's been like to kind of enter in this new capacity as director.
Thanks. Yes. Well, Ramin is a great point to start with because I came to Ramin as a young and hungry 22-year-old in New York City. And he was a young filmmaker. His first film had been at New Directors, New Films. And this festival kind of brought us together in a sense because he actually just needed someone to help him edit a small video intro. I think it must have been at that point, maybe the 40-year anniversary.
It was, which is hilarious. And thank you for calling him a young filmmaker because I think we're the exact same age. So that makes me feel good. But yes, I do recall asking him if he would be willing to record an intro for our 40th anniversary celebration. And now 10 years later, he has also recorded an intro for the 50th, which is streaming somewhere in the social sphere. And I'm wondering if there's a 22-year-old out there who he asked to help him on that one, unless it was you and 10 years later again. But what a remarkable kind of full circle on that.
Yeah. And of course, Ramin is a producer on this film, along with my other producing partners, my terrific partners in Malta, Rebecca and Oliver. And, Ramin was an influence on me in thinking about how to, make films. In the way that he was approaching cinema, which was to, harness the rawness of reality but tell a very kind of universal story and make meaning of the world that we're living in. Those films really touched me, and his tutelage was really valuable over the last 10 years. I ended up almost kind of by accident in the editing room. I just kind of sort of knew how to use a computer, and that was a good outlet for me. But it was a really valuable perch for me to absorb everything else that was going into the film, and to watch someone who was, yes, a director, but also the writer and often also the editor of his own films. Editing is kind of like the X-ray of the film. So I could learn a lot about how to sculpt a performance and to look at camera work, to look at light, and see also very valuably, where the kind of the mistakes were and how to fix them, and then to take that into the next film. And so it was a 10-year journey to this point. Ramin helped me in many ways along the way, and there were other partners and other people that I was exposed to by being a part of his sort of the family of filmmakers that kind of grew up around him. Nicholas Elliott is another collaborator of his who had his own short film that I helped him edit. That was at New Directors, New Films, I think in 2016.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that's truly all in the family. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about, I mean, so much has been made about that first element of producing this film in Malta. Talk to us a little bit about the significance of that, both for you personally and for Malta.
Yeah. Well, as long as I wanted to make films, I really wanted to make them in Malta. My parents emigrated to the States in the late 80s. I was born here. We tried to get back there as often as we could. And, it was a world that was as different to my own sort of day-to-day reality as I could kind of paint it. And it always just felt like my imagination was on fire in Malta. I had a connection to it in a deep sense, but also there was an unfamiliarity about it that made my imagination kind of work overtime. When we don't understand, our imagination steps in. And so having those two things, both a love and an unfamiliarity, I think can really fuel you as a storyteller. And just as long as I wanted to make films, because of the personal connection, yes, I wanted to get to Malta to do it. But also as long as I was watching films and studying, I came to know and kind of love national cinemas of very many different places. I was always expecting to eventually discover what the Maltese national cinema was. And as I went along, it just I was never able to see these Maltese films I always expected to find. And it struck me, it's very odd because Malta is kind of in the center of, and really on the doorstep of so many other great film traditions, but it never had its own. And I figured again that someone else was going to make those films, and they never really happened. So the advice to make the film that you want to see was really taken to heart. And it, kind of dovetailed with my own kind of personal mission, and the chance to take people to Malta, many for the first time, is an extraordinary privilege. And I'm glad that we get to do that in this film, and hopefully on more to come.
No, absolutely. And obviously the location itself, is a character in a certain way, and hopefully we can speak to that. But maybe you can confirm or deny a piece of film trivia. So there has been film production on Malta, and some of it may not have been like announced as such, but is it true that there's still an Altman-esque Popeye village somewhere on the Maltese coast that was once the set for Altman's Popeye?
Altman's already been there, done that. Yeah. Well, you touch on something. So in that's the Robin Williams, the Popeye film. They built these sets. Of course, they built them so well that they're still standing today. And it's a little bit of a tourist trap, but it's just kind of a great testament to the artisans who made it. But you touch on something that's a larger point to what we were just speaking about, which is also the irony that while there was no such thing as Maltese film production was in abundance and has been for many decades. And you and me and everyone who's probably ever seen a film at the multiplex has been looking at Malta on screen for decades, but we've never recognized it as such. Films like Gladiator, right? Spielberg's Munich, World War Z, wow. Troy, a lot of kind of sword and sandals films that make use of the locations, and also their large water tanks that are used for water-based scenes. So, it added an even greater kind of fuel under the fire, a lot of fuel to the fire under especially my collaborators in Malta, because it's a chance for us to, in a sense, take back what Malta could do. It's always standing in for somewhere else and never gets to play it, to play itself. So that really inspired us and was a common mission between myself and my producers, Rebecca and Oliver. And again, is one that we're, very hopeful to carry on into the future.
So speaking of playing yourself, or your finding an authentic self, the film has won a special award at Sundance, and I believe that was specifically for acting. And so talk to us about the process of finding Jesmark. I mean, I've read a bit about it, but I'd love to hear, and I think we all would love to hear from you about the process of finding this incredible, talented person to embody your lead character?
Well, from the very inception of this project, it was designed to work with a non-actor lead, and actually a couple non-actor leads. The fisherman characters were always going to be played by fishermen. I had, the courage to do that, of course, from coming up around Ramin, also in Rachel Israel's great film Keep the Change, of which I was the editor, in which she worked with a cast who were all non-actors, real people on the autism spectrum. And I'm just so moved by those performances because they seem to break through the edges of the screen when someone can bring, all of kind of their life's experience to the role. I think you get something that's just so elevated and can really touch you. In this particular case, the challenge was significant because I had written kind of younger characters. They're sort of 25 and 40 years old. And the average age of a fisherman in Malta now is over 50.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, fishermen do not have headshots. So the only way to find them is to drive around and to go to every fishing village and try to make inroads. And the path was not always straight. So we were looking with my terrific casting director in Malta, Ed Side, no relation to the philosopher. He also was a part-time fisherman and had connections in many of these villages, but we were kind of striking out after a number of months. Literally on my last day before I was due to fly back to New York, we heard tell of a couple guys that might be interesting. We drove down to see them. We met Jesmark and David. Normally we would do a little bit of a song and a dance, like just say hi, and then we'd drive away and come back another day so that, we wouldn't scare them off.
Yeah.
In this case, we didn't have time to do that. So I just said, can we go on the boat together? The four of us went out. I took out my little camcorder and I asked them to improvise a scene that I had kind of loosely written. And it's the scene which has ended up in the film, which is about where they're fighting over the swordfish. And the guys just started improvising it, and it was amazing. It just felt like the whole film clicked into place. They were performing the scene way better than I'd written it. Instantly, they were at each other's throats, and the emotion was really hot, which was not how I'd originally written it. I kind of imagined it would be a little bit more of like a logical debate. When I saw them actually doing it, I said, oh yeah, of course, that's how it is. They've actually been in this situation before.
Wow.
And in that moment, that's what I mean when the whole film clicked into place, because I could see how they were going to bring that authenticity to every scene, and that we wouldn't be able to go wrong, as long as I, was able to write the script around them and kind of guide them in the right way.
Yeah. And neither of them had acted formally in any capacity before?
Never thought about it until, the moment that I showed up. But I should also say that they thought it was like a really random, meeting, and that I went away and I came back to Malta 6 months later. During that time, I got a little crush on them. And as we sometimes do, we get a crush and then we imagine our whole futures together. It's not always a good idea. I wrote the whole script around them.
Wow. And
then I came back and I was like, do you want to do it? Which is an insane thing to do, because they could have just said no. I didn't really know them that well. I didn't know what their sense of commitment might be. Luckily it paid off. And with these films, they do require these kind of insane gambles at a certain point.
Wow, that is the best one boat stand story I've ever heard.
Good way to put it.
You bring that, that authenticity just courses through the film, clearly. And I read another story. So not only the authenticity, the realness of the actors, but the realness of the shoot itself. And there was a night shoot story that I read about that just seems so wild in every sense. Maybe you could share that with us or confirm or deny that it's actually true.
Yeah. On the one hand, I have a little bit of PTSD revisiting it, but it's always in the service of the film. So I'm happy to go there with you. There's a scene kind of in the middle of the film in which Jesmark and Uday, his new fishing partner, go out to do a kind of a black market expedition at night. And the only way to do this is actually to go out on the real boat and shoot at night. You're hoping for the best weather, but you're never quite sure what you're going to get. there was quite a high swell, and that was okay. We were managing for a little while, but the wind was also blowing the diesel fumes of this boat straight into our faces. Uday was not feeling great, so I stepped in for him to kind of read with Jesmark off camera. I was doing okay, and then I started losing the lines. I looked at my script, and the minute I started reading my script, it just, something clicked. I became terribly seasick. So half of the crew, myself included, and one of the actors, obviously not Jesmark, he was laughing at us. We were all, clutching our stomachs and leaning over the edge of the boat, trying to, make our day, or in this case, make our night. I was literally having to kind of avoid throwing up on my director's monitor and to try to call out directions as often as I could. But I also have to credit Uday, because we were sort of in a state of despair. We only had this one night and this boat for this one time to shoot like this really consequential sequence in the film. There's no chance to do it again. We really didn't know what to do. And somehow Uday was overcome with sort of this inspiration. And he just started performing the second half of the sequence, where he's explaining to Jesmark how the black market works. And his performance was so good, he like inspired the rest of us. We picked up the cameras, we picked up the mic, and we just started going again. And somehow like the nausea left our bodies. I don't know, it was like a little bit of a miracle, and we got through it. So, that's credit to our collaborators for pulling us through.
Absolutely. No, I'm there's a bit of a trend every year in new directors, like unexpected themes or trends kind of emerge. So your colleagues who made the film Pebbles, the Tamil film, described in their Q&A the experience of this long scene of walking through a desert in high Indian summer, which they actually did. So for a bit of realness along his, and the characters walk barefoot as they would in the narrative, in the script. So the whole crew walked barefoot. And they had to have there were multiple shooters on the film, because they could only stand walking in the sand long enough to do it. So I think this might be the come on, Kubrick, you could have pushed yourself harder, like Super Endurance Festival in some ways, but that is a remarkable story. Look, there is so much specificity to this, but there are obviously larger truths. And, this is the working class survival story is universal in many ways. I'm wondering, how did you set the balance between the very specific story of this working class struggle and the collapse of an industry with the kind of more global experience that many folks are going through or have gone through?
Well, I think what you're touching on is what is so magical about these films, in that the smaller that you make them, the bigger they come, the bigger that they become. And so in a way, you don't quite have to choose. I'm really drawn to movies that are really specific in their perspective, and that take me to worlds that I've never seen before. And so I kind of wanted to take up that challenge and to bring people into successive worlds that they'd never seen before, not just Malta, but a specific community in Malta, and then a side of that community that you'd never see, and the seafood industry, and then the black market side of the seafood industry. And there's just, it makes your job as the screenwriter all the more enjoyable, because you get to exploit the specifics that give you scenes that couldn't be in anyone else's. To think of one like the fish fraud scene, where he kind of orchestrates selling off scallops from kind of the dregs of what was coming out of the abattoir, which is a real thing that happens. But you're harnessing those things always in the service of the character and the dilemma that they're in. And it just gives you, a ladder to climb to build toward something that's very universal. And as long as, those emotions are there, people can interpret them through their own experience and see past the specifics. And then it kind of expands inside of their own heart and their own soul. And that's that weird 2 + 2 = 5 thing that, we get from these films. And I just feel so lucky that I was able to do it via the Trojan horse of all this exciting stuff in Malta that I've always wanted to show people.
Yeah, no, just truly remarkable. You are very film literate, and certainly anybody that's worked with or alongside Ramin Bahrani would be very film literate. I'm wondering, what did you watch in prep for this film? Did you go back to specifics in film history or favorites? I have some things in mind, but I also have the suspicion that there's some things that might be unexpected that you might have gone back to.
That's a great question. Ramin is a great person to, especially when you're kind of kicking around an idea, to talk about films, because he has such a depth of knowledge. And, so we, of course, go back to the neorealists, which were a big influence for him. And of course, this film was always going to be working kind of under that shadow. So indeed, I went back and looked at those films and reminded myself of why I love them so much. And you can't avoid La Terra Trema, which it's uncanny watching it. Maybe you'd see it after you see this film if you haven't. How the plight of the fishermen in some 80 years, I think, in some ways has not changed very much. There were so many other similarities that I could point to, but one that was all the more uncanny was the lead of that film has a passing resemblance to the lead of mine. And it gives you a sense of courage. It's also a film that used a family of non-actor fishermen.
Yeah.
And so looking what they were able to do without many of the kind of sophisticated tools that make our jobs easier today, and that they were able to make something really moving from very humble kind of material. No movie stars, no sets, shooting often like a documentary. That's just how we did it on this film. And I was given the courage by looking at the neorealists, and especially the ethos behind them,
Yeah.
and why it's important to work with non-actors in this style. That there's also kind of an ethical choice behind casting them, and that they're kind of portraying versions of themselves and telling their own story. I'm really moved by the participation that the non-actors have in articulating their own experience on film. And to maybe fast forward to some contemporary influences, I'm also really in love with the social realism of Ken Loach. And again, just how granular those films can be, and that they can be about bureaucracy in a way, but that it could also be really exciting. And there were so many ways that we, and this came out of the research when I started to learn about these many Byzantine rules that fishermen are subjected to. It's like, well, if Ken Loach landed in Malta, this is absolutely what he would see, because it's so rife with drama. It's so absurd in a sense to apply the world of papers to the world of fishermen. But then also, to show how systems, fail people. And that seems to be at the heart of what Jesmark's faced with, so many kind of systems collapsing at the same time, and trying to hold up a family amidst all that.
No, that's remarkable and makes a lot of sense. Look, we're so grateful that you could spend this time with us and share your film. And I have a very sneaking suspicion that in 10 years, there'll be someone sitting, hopefully not where you are, hopefully on stage with me here in a movie theater, talking about the inspiration that you provided to them to make their own first feature. But I'm just wondering, for you, what's next? Are you going to return to Malta, either specifically or on a production, or just what do you have anything in mind for what might be the next step for you?
Well, already working on my next film. It is taking me back to Malta, and once this misery all clears up, I'll be on the first plane back there to start casting. I'm also going to be working again with non-actors and showing a very unique side of Malta that most people don't know. I'm really excited about it because it's also going to give me a chance to explore a different genre and a different tone, way different than this film. So hope to share with you and audiences at Film at Lincoln Center in MoMA, hopefully in the near future.
Absolutely. Alex, congratulations again, and thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us for this Q&A.
Thank you.